They thought that because they gave me birth, they had the right to burn my life to the ground for a quick payday. But they forgot that the daughter they raised to be quiet had grown up to be a woman who keeps receipts. When the judge finally saw what I was holding, their stunned silence screamed louder than any confession. My name is Rita Weatherby, and up until 6 o'clock this morning, I believed that the deed to my house stored in my fireproof safe actually meant something. I was 32 years old, sleeping the deep, exhausted sleep of a woman who had spent the last decade building a life brick by brick, entirely on her own terms. That sleep did not end gradually. It was not coaxed away by the morning sun filtering through the blinds or the sound of birds in the oak tree outside. It was murdered by a sound so loud and violent that for a split second, I thought the roof had collapsed. It was a metallic, rhythmic pounding. Bam, bam, bam. This was not the knock of a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar. It was not a delivery driver impatient for a signature. It was the specific, terrifying percussion of authority. It was a sound designed to bypass the conscious mind and trigger the lizard brain, flooding the system with adrenaline before feet even touched the floor. I sat up, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was freezing. The heating system in this old craftsman bungalow was temperamental, and the floorboards were ice cold against my bare feet as I swung my legs out of bed. The house was usually silent at this hour. Silver Lake, despite being a city neighborhood, held a heavy gray stillness in the early morning, a quiet that felt protected. But now, that silence had been shattered, replaced by an echoing dread that vibrated in the walls. I grabbed my robe, wrapping it tight around me as if the terry cloth could serve as armor. I did not run to the door. I walked. I forced myself to walk because running felt like an admission of guilt, and I had done nothing wrong. The pounding came again. 3 more strikes. Harder this time, rattling the frame of the front door. When I reached the hallway, I stopped. I pressed my eye to the peephole, the glass lens cold against my skin. The fisheye distortion warped the image, but the details were sharp enough to send a fresh wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. Standing on my porch was a deputy sheriff. He was a wall of brown polyester and utility gear. I could see the badge pinned to his chest catching the weak morning light. His right hand rested casually, habitually, on the grip of his holstered firearm. It was not a threat, exactly, but a statement of capability. In his left hand, he held a clipboard pressed against his chest. His face was impassive, the face of a man who had done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 times more. He looked bored. I did not unlock the door immediately. My eyes shifted past the bulk of the officer to the street beyond. A sheriff's patrol SUV was parked at the curb, but its lights were dark. There were no flashing reds and blues, no siren wail. This was a silent raid. It felt predatory. And then I saw them, parked directly across the street, perfectly positioned for the best viewing angle, was a black sedan I knew better than my own hand. It was my father's car. My parents, Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby, were standing there. They were not pacing anxiously. They were not looking at the house with concern, wondering why the police were banging on their daughter's door at dawn. They were leaning back against the side of the sedan, arms crossed over their chests. Comfortable. They looked like patrons at a theater arriving early to ensure they did not miss the opening curtain. My mother was wearing her favorite beige coat, her face set in a mask of grim satisfaction. My father was looking at his watch, then back at my front door, waiting for the performance to begin. The bile rose in my throat. This was not a mistake. This was a production. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale, cold air of the hallway, and unlocked the deadbolt. The click sounded deafening. I did not remove the security chain. I cracked the door open 4 inches, the metal chain pulling taut, creating a barrier between my sanctuary and the force of the state. "Rita Weatherby?" the deputy asked. He did not ask it like a question. He said it like he was reading a serial number off a piece of inventory. "I am," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, low. I could feel the tremor in my hands. so I gripped the edge of the door until my knuckles turned white. But I refused to let that tremor reach my vocal cords. "I am Deputy Miller with the County Sheriff's Civil Division," he recited, looking down at his clipboard rather than at me. "I am here to execute a writ of possession. You have 15 minutes to gather essential personal items and vacate the premises." The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Writ of possession. Vacate. "There is a mistake," I said, my eyes darting over his shoulder to my parents. They hadn't moved. My mother tilted her head slightly, catching my eye through the crack in the door. She didn't wave. She just watched. "I own this house. I have the deed. I pay the mortgage." Deputy Miller sighed, a short, sharp exhale of patience wearing thin. He finally looked me in the eye. His expression wasn't malicious, which somehow made it worse. It was pitiful. He looked at me the way one looks at a child who doesn't understand the rules of the game. "I have a court order, ma'am," he said, turning the clipboard around so I could see the document. He tapped a manicured fingernail against a block of text. "Judgment for possession entered by the Superior Court. Default judgment." I squinted at the paper. The legibility was poor. A photocopy of a photocopy, but the names were clear enough. Plaintiff, Garrick Weatherby and Sylvia Weatherby. Defendant, Rita Weatherby. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My parents had sued me. They had sued me for my own home, the home I bought with my own money, the home I had renovated with my own hands, and somehow, they had won without me even knowing a battle was being fought. "I was never served," I insisted, the panic finally starting to bleed into my tone. "I never received notice of a hearing. You cannot kick me out of my own house without a trial." Deputy Miller pulled the clipboard back. He checked his watch. "The judgment was signed last week. Ma'am, as far as the state is concerned, you are no longer the owner. You are an illegal occupant." "But it is a lie," I hissed, leaning closer to the gap, ignoring the cold wind biting at my face. "Look at them across the street. Does that look like a landlord dispute to you? This is personal. They are trying to steal my home." The deputy glanced backward at the black sedan. For a second, just a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed. He saw them. Two elderly people watching a police eviction with the calm detachment of sociopaths. He looked back at me, and I saw a flicker of hesitation, a tiny crack in his procedural armor, but then he touched the paper again. The paper with the judge's signature and the court seal. That paper was his reality. My truth was just noise. "I do not have the authority to overturn a judge's ruling on a front porch at 6 a.m, Miller said, his voice hardening, returning to the script. "This order is effective immediately. There is no time to debate ownership right now. You have 14 minutes left. If you are not out, I will have to escort you out, and the locksmith will secure the property with your belongings inside. Do you understand?" I looked at him. I looked at the gun on his hip. I looked at my parents, who were now sharing a thermos of coffee, waiting for the finale where I would be dragged out in my pajamas, screaming and broken. I realized then that screaming would give them exactly what they paid for. They wanted a tantrum. They wanted the neighborhood to see Rita Weatherby lose her mind. I swallowed the scream. I tightened my grip on the door. "I understand," I said. 14 minutes. I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut felt final, like the closing of a coffin lid. But I wasn't dead yet. I turned to face my house, my brain shifting gears from shock to survival. I didn't have time to cry. I had time to pack, and more importantly, I had time to think. I kept the security chain engaged, the metal taut against the slide. Maintaining that 4-inch slice of the world between my sanctuary and the impending disaster, I could not simply accept the word of a stranger with a gun, even if he wore a badge. I needed to see the ink. I needed to see the betrayal stamped on official county bond paper. "Show me," I said. My voice was raspy, stripped of its usual warmth. "I want to see the first page." "Hold it up to the gap." Deputy Miller exhaled, a sound of weary compliance, and lifted the clipboard. He pressed the document against the open space of the doorframe. The morning light was gray and weak, but it was enough. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page seemed to vibrate with malice. Plaintiff: Garrick Weatherby and Sylvia Weatherby. Seeing their names listed there, in the cold, binary language of the legal system, felt different than knowing they were across the street. It formalized their cruelty. It transformed my parents from merely toxic individuals into active litigants seeking my destruction. I looked past the clipboard, through the sliver of space, and directed my gaze to the other side of the road. They were still there. My father was leaning against the fender of the black sedan, his arms folded across his chest in a posture of relaxed entitlement. My mother stood beside him, her head cocked slightly to the side. They were not hiding their faces in shame. They were watching the front porch with a hunger that turned my stomach. It suddenly clicked. They did not just want the house. If they only wanted the asset, they could have sent a lawyer or mailed a letter. No, this was theater. They had parked specifically to witness the moment the sheriff dragged me out. They wanted to see their daughter standing on the sidewalk in her pajamas, shivering, humiliated, and broken. They wanted the neighbors to see it. They wanted to strip me of my dignity before they stripped me of my property. "How is this possible?" I asked, my eyes snapping back to the deputy. "I pay the taxes. I pay the insurance. How can there be a judgment?" "It is a default judgment, ma'am," Miller said. His tone was professional, but the edge of impatience was dulling, replaced by a rote explanation he had likely delivered hundreds of times. "It means the court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs because you failed to respond to the lawsuit. You did not show up." "I did not show up because I did not know I was being sued," I said, the frustration finally leaking into my voice. "I never received a summons. No one came to this door." Miller shook his head slightly and used his pen to point to a paragraph halfway down the page. "The record shows you were properly served via substituted service at your residence of record." I leaned in, squinting at the block of text his pen was tapping. "Service address, 2204 Pine Street." The air left my lungs. 2204 Pine Street. "That is not my house," I whispered. "That is my aunt's house." I had not set foot on Pine Street in 5 years. Not since the family schism that had prompted me to buy my own place and cut ties with their toxicity in the first place. My parents knew that. They knew exactly where I lived. They were standing across the street from my actual front door right now, but they had deliberately listed an old, irrelevant address on the court documents. They had served the papers to a place they knew I would never go, to a relative who was likely complicit in their scheme, ensuring that the clock would run out on my response time without me ever knowing the clock had started. It was a dirty legal trick known as sewer service. It was fraud, plain and simple. From across the street, a voice cut through the morning chill. It was high, melodic, and sickeningly sweet. "Rita, honey," my mother called out. She had stepped away from the car, taking a few steps toward the middle of the road. She did not look like a woman evicting her child. She looked like a mother chiding a toddler who was refusing to eat her vegetables. "Don't make it hard for the officer. Rita, just come out of there. We can talk like family once you are outside." The sound of her voice, dripping with that performative concern, almost made me buckle. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was framing my eviction, an act of violence she had orchestrated, as a mere tantrum on my part. She was offering a solution to a problem she had created, provided I submitted to her terms. "Talk like family," I repeated under my breath. The irony was corrosive. I looked at Deputy Miller. He had turned his head to look at my parents. He saw the black sedan, the relaxed posture of the elderly couple, and he heard the cloying sweetness of my mother's voice. When he turned back to me, the boredom in his eyes had shifted. There was a flicker of something else there. Suspicion. He was a veteran of domestic disputes. He knew the smell of a setup when it wafted right under his nose. He looked at the paperwork again, then at the house I was standing in, a house clearly lived in, clearly maintained, and then back at the Pine Street address on the service record. He knew. Somewhere in his gut. He knew this was wrong. But then his eyes dropped to the red stamp of the Superior Court judge at the bottom of the order. His suspicion did not matter. The law does not run on vibes. It runs on paper. And the paper said I was a squatter in my own home. "I am sorry," Miller said. And for the first time, he sounded like he meant it. "But the seal is valid. My hands are tied. The judgment stands until a judge says otherwise." I gripped the door frame. My mind was racing, processing the betrayal at high speed. They had weaponized the postal service. They had weaponized the court calendar. And now they were weaponizing this deputy. "If I leave?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What happens to the locks?" Miller did not sugarcoat it. "The locksmith is 2 minutes out. As soon as the property is vacated, the cylinders get changed. You lose access immediately." That was the endgame. Once they changed the locks, possession was 9/10 of the law. If I walked out that door, I would be fighting from the outside, trying to prove ownership of a house I couldn't enter. While they looted my life from the inside, I felt a scream building in my chest. It was a primal thing, a desire to fling the door open and scream at my parents, to scream at the neighbors, to wail against the unfairness of the universe. I wanted to cry. I wanted to beg the deputy to see the truth. But I looked at my mother across the street. She was smiling a small, tight smile, waiting for the breakdown. She was feeding on the anticipation of my collapse. If I screamed, she won. If I cried, she won. I imagined a switch in the back of my neck. It was a survival mechanism I had developed years ago living under their roof. I mentally reached back and flipped it. The heat in my blood vanished. The trembling in my hands ceased. The urge to cry evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Emotions were a liability right now. Emotions were what they were counting on to make me sloppy. I needed to be a machine. I needed to be a camera. I needed to be a lawyer, a detective, and a soldier, all in the span of the next 14 minutes. I looked Deputy Miller in the eye. I did not plead. I did not blink. "I am going to get my things," I said. I closed the door gently. There was no slam, just the quiet, decisive click of the latch. I turned away from the entrance, my heart rate slowing down to a rhythmic, predatory thud. I was not leaving this house defeated. I was retreating to gather ammunition. I did not turn toward my bedroom to pack a bag. I did not run to the bathroom to grab a toothbrush or my medication. Instead, I turned back to Deputy Miller, who was already reaching for the door handle to pull it shut, signaling the end of our interaction. I placed my hand flat against the wood, stopping him. "I need 2 minutes," I said. It was not a request. It was a statement of logistical necessity. "I do not need to pack clothes. I need to document what is in your hands." Miller looked at me, perplexed. Most people in this situation were scrambling for heirlooms or cash. I was asking for paperwork. He hesitated, but perhaps the sheer strangeness of my reaction made him curious. Or maybe he just wanted to avoid a physical confrontation. He held the clipboard steady. I pulled my phone from my robe pocket. My hands were steady now, operating with the precision of a surgeon. I opened the camera app and switched to the high-resolution setting. I began to photograph the file. Page by page. I did not just take wide shots. I zoomed in. I captured the case number at the top right corner. I captured the date stamp of the filing. I captured the name of the presiding judge, Honorable Catherine Holloway. "You really should be packing, ma'am," Miller warned, shifting his weight. "You are burning daylight." "This is packing," I murmured, snapping a photo of the claim amount. Then I reached the most critical document in the stack. The proof of service. This was the legal instrument that claimed I had been notified of the lawsuit. My eyes scanned the lines rapidly. It stated that the papers were served at 2204 Pine Street on the 14th of January, and there, at the bottom, was the line for the recipient's signature. The signature did not say Rita Weatherby. It read, in a looping, decorative script that I recognized from 1,000 birthday cards and passive-aggressive notes over the years. Mrs. Weatherby. The shutter sound of my phone camera clicked loudly in the silence. I took 3 photos of that signature from different angles. The audacity was breathtaking. My mother had not only used a false address, she had physically received the papers herself at that false address, signed her own name as the recipient, and allowed the process server to believe she was accepting them on my behalf. She had served herself to evict me. It was fraud so brazen it was almost elegant. "Thank you," I said to Miller, stepping back. 10 minutes left," he reminded me. I turned and walked into my house. I did not look at the furniture I had restored. I did not look at the paintings I had collected. I walked straight to the master bedroom closet, knelt on the floor, and pulled away the false panel at the back. Behind it sat a small, heavy fireproof safe. My fingers flew over the keypad. Beep, 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 click. The door swung open. I ignored the cash. I ignored the jewelry. I reached for the expanding file folder labeled Property. I pulled out the grant deed. I opened it to ensure it was the original, embossed with the county seal, listing me, and only me, as the sole owner in fee simple. I grabbed my property tax returns for the last 3 years. I grabbed the homeowner's insurance policy, which listed me as the primary insured. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest like a shield. I marched back to the front door where Deputy Miller was waiting. I did not put the papers away. Instead, I held up my phone again and dialed a number I had looked up on the county website months ago for an unrelated zoning issue. I put it on speakerphone and held it up between us so Miller could hear every word. The line rang twice. "County Superior Court, Civil Division," a tired voice answered. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "I need to check the status of case number CV 49201, Weatherby versus Weatherby." There was the sound of typing on the other end. Deputy Miller watched me, his eyebrows knitting together. He was listening. "That case is closed," the clerk said. "Judgment for possession was entered on January 28th. "I understand," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Miller. "I am the defendant. I was never served. I am currently standing with a sheriff's deputy who is executing the writ. I need to know the earliest time I can appear before Judge Holloway for an ex parte hearing to set aside the default judgment based on fraudulent service." The clerk paused. The legal terminology had done its job. I was not speaking like a victim. I was speaking like a lawyer. "Ex parte applications are heard at 8:30 in the morning in Department 4, the clerk replied, her tone shifting from dismissive to helpful. "You need to file your motion with the clerk's office by 8 o'clock. "Thank you," I said, and disconnected. I looked at Miller. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just an enforcer. He was a witness. He had heard the clerk. He had seen the documents in my hand. He realized that I was not crazy, and I was not a squatter. I was a citizen who knew the code. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so it would not carry across the street to the black sedan. "Listen to me," he whispered, a sudden conspiracy forming between us. "The eviction crew, the guys the landlord hired to empty the house, they are scheduled to be here in 1 hour. Once they start hauling stuff out, things get broken, things get lost. It is a mess." He glanced over his shoulder at my parents, then back to me. "If you can get a stay of execution signed by the judge before that crew unlocks the door, I can call them off. I will sit in my patrol car around the corner and do paperwork for 60 minutes. But the second that hour is up, I have to let them in. Do you understand?" 1 hour, I said. "I can do it." "Go," he urged. "Do not worry about the house. Just go get the paper." I grabbed my purse and keys from the entry table. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the front door shut. I locked the deadbolt with my key. It felt symbolic. I was locking it. Not them. I turned and walked down the steps, across the street. My parents straightened up. They had been expecting a show. They were waiting for the tears, the screaming, the deputy dragging me by the arms. Instead, they saw me walk out in a trench coat, holding a file folder, moving with the purposeful stride of a CEO heading to a board meeting. "Where are you going?" my father shouted, his voice cracking with confusion. You cannot just leave. The police are here. Rita, my mother called out. The sweetness gone, replaced by a shrill demand. Rita, you come here right now. We need to discuss the terms of your surrender. I did not look at them. I did not turn my head 1 degree in their direction. To acknowledge them would be to validate their existence, and in that moment, they were nothing to me but defendants in a future lawsuit. I walked past the deputy's SUV. I walked past the black sedan. I could feel their eyes boring into the side of my head, confused and angry that I was denying them their moment of triumph. I got into my car. I started the engine. The radio came on, playing a cheerful pop song that sounded jarringly out of place. I turned it off. I needed silence. I needed to arrange the chessboard in my mind. As I pulled away from the curb, I checked the dashboard clock. 6:25 in the morning. I had exactly 65 minutes to drive to the courthouse, draft a motion from scratch, file it, and get a judge to sign it. I did not speed. I drove with terrifying precision. My parents thought they had checkmated me. They did not realize that while they were playing checkers, I had spent my entire life memorizing the rulebook for war. The county courthouse was a monument to bureaucratic indifference. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the unique, dusty scent of thousands of decomposing paper files. I burst through the heavy double doors, my breath hitching in my throat, only to hit a wall of human misery. The security line snaked back toward the entrance, a sluggish river of people emptying their pockets into plastic bins. I checked my watch. 6:55 in the morning. The court did not technically open until 8, but the line for the metal detectors formed early. Every minute I spent standing behind a man slowly unlacing his work boots was a minute my parents were closer to breaking into my home. I forced myself to stand still, vibrating with a kinetic energy that threatened to shatter my composure. When it was finally my turn, I moved with robotic efficiency. Keys in the bin, phone in the bin, belt off, walk through, collect, run. I sprinted to the civil clerk's office on the first floor. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. Behind the thick glass partition sat a woman whose name tag read Janice. She had the weary, heavy-lidded expression of someone who had heard every lie. Excuse and plea for mercy the human race had to offer. She was sipping from a styrofoam cup, watching the clock on the wall as if willing it to move faster. I approached the window. I did not cry. I did not beg. I knew that to a clerk like Janice, emotion was just noise. I need to see the file for case CV 49201, I said, sliding my driver's license under the glass. And I need the forms for an ex parte application to stay a writ of possession. Janice looked at me over the rim of her glasses. She did not move to the computer immediately. She sighed. A long, rattling sound. Honey, the judge has not even had her coffee yet, and if you have been evicted, it is usually too late. Once the judgment is entered, it was entered based on fraudulent service, I interrupted, keeping my voice level but hard. And I have reason to believe the underlying claim is based on forged instruments. Please, pull the file. Something in my tone, perhaps the lack of hysteria, made her pause. She set down her cup and typed the case number into her terminal. Her eyes scanned the screen, reflecting the blue light of the monitor. Weatherby versus Weatherby, she read flatly. Judgment for plaintiffs. Writ issued yesterday. Looks like a standard unlawful detainer. You are the daughter? I am the owner, I corrected her. I opened my folder and pressed my original grant deed against the glass. This is the deed recorded 5 years ago. It is in my name, sole property. Janice looked at the deed, then back at her screen. She frowned. The boredom on her face began to fracture, replaced by a confusion that rapidly sharpened into professional concern. She clicked her mouse a few times, drilling deeper into the digital case file. That is odd, she muttered. The plaintiffs attached an exhibit to their complaint. They claimed title based on a transfer that happened 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. What transfer? A gift deed, Janice said. turning the monitor slightly so I could see the low-resolution scan. According to this, you transferred the property to Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby on August 14th of last year. Consideration is listed as love and affection. I felt the floor drop out from under me. It was not just an eviction. It was not just a trick to get me out of the house. They had stolen the house. They had forged a deed, signed my name, and recorded it with the county. They had legally hijacked my largest asset behind my back. "I never signed that," I whispered. The horror was physical, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I have not spoken to them in years. I certainly did not give them a house worth nearly $1 million for free. "Well, there is a signature here," Janice said, pointing to the scrawl on the screen. I leaned in, my forehead resting against the cool glass. I studied the signature. It was good. It was terrifyingly good. It had the same sharp loops on the R and the same trailing tail on the Y that I used. If I were a stranger, I would believe it was mine. But I knew the pressure points of my own hand, and I knew the rhythm of my own writing. This was a mimicry. It was a performance of my identity. "Look at the date," I said, my voice gaining strength. "August 14th. "Yes," Janice confirmed. "Notarized on August 14th. My mind raced backward, tearing through the calendar of the previous year. August. The summer had been brutal. August 14th. Where was I? The date felt heavy, significant, but in the chaos of the moment, I could not pin it down. I just knew I was not signing away my life to the people who tried to ruin it. "That document is a forgery," I stated. "And the service of process was sent to a house I do not live in. They engineered a default judgment to steal the property before I could catch them." Janice looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. She saw the terrifying clarity in my eyes. She realized this was not a tenant trying to dodge rent. This was a crime scene. "Okay," she said, her demeanor shifting instantly. She reached under the counter and pulled out a packet of color-coded forms. "You need to file an ex parte application to set aside void judgment. You need to check the box for fraud and the box for lack of actual notice. And you need to do it fast." She slid the papers under the glass. "Judge Holloway is in Department 4, Janice warned, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial volume. "She is a stickler for procedure. She hates it when defendants ignore court summons and then come crying at the 11th hour. You have to convince her that you are not negligent. You have to convince her you are a victim." "I can do that," I said. I took the pen she offered. My hand did not shake. I filled out the forms with the speed of desperation. Under the section for Reason for Ex parte Relief, I wrote in block letters, "Plaintiffs committed perjury regarding service of process and submitted forged title documents to the court." I signed the declaration under penalty of perjury. The ink looked black and final. I pushed the papers back to Janice. She stamped them with a heavy, rhythmic thud, filed, urgent. The sound echoed in the quiet office like a gunshot. "Department 4 is on the 3rd floor, Janice said, handing me the carbon copies. "Run." I did not wait to say thank you. I grabbed the papers and turned toward the elevators, but the elevator was on the top floor. Moving slowly, I pivoted and hit the stairwell door. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heels clicking sharply on the concrete, the sound of a ticking clock roaring in my ears. I had 45 minutes before the locksmith drilled the cylinder on my front door. I had 45 minutes to overturn a legal judgment that had already been signed, sealed, and delivered. My parents thought they had buried me in paperwork. They were about to find out that I could dig my way out faster than they could shovel the dirt. The hallway outside Department 4 was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the security checkpoint downstairs. I sat on a hard wooden bench, the kind designed to be uncomfortable so that no one would linger longer than necessary. My laptop was open on my knees, tethered to my phone's hotspot. I had minutes, not hours, to construct a timeline that would shatter my parents' carefully fabricated reality. I needed to prove that on August 14th. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was nowhere near the notary office where I supposedly signed my house away. I logged into the employee portal of Vanguard Data Systems. Working for a high-level defense contractor had its stresses, but right now, the paranoid level of surveillance they kept on their employees was about to become my salvation. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a complex string of passwords and waiting for the two-factor authentication code. August 14th. As the system loaded, the date kept echoing in my mind. Why did it feel so heavy? Why did my stomach knot up just thinking about that specific midsummer day? And then, as the company logo spun on the screen, it hit me. Red flag. August 14th had not been a normal Tuesday. It was the start of Red Flag, the annual, mandatory, all-hands-on-deck cybersecurity war game that Vanguard ran to test our defenses against state-sponsored hacking scenarios. It was the 1 week of the year when the company went into full lockdown mode. I navigated to the physical security archives. My heart began to race, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. On Red Flag days, we did not work in our usual cubicles. We were moved into the SCIF, the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It was a windowless bunker 3 stories underground, a room built to be a black hole for information. To enter the SCIF, you had to surrender all personal electronics. No cell phones, no smartwatches, no tablets. You were stripped of your digital self and sealed inside a room where the only way in or out was through a biometric airlock. I pulled up the access control logs for August 14th, the screen populated with a spreadsheet of timestamps and location codes. I filtered by my employee ID. There it was, the truth, recorded in unalterable digital code. Entry: 0745. Retinal scan confirmed. Location: SKIF Alpha. Sublevel 3. Exit: 20-30 hours. Retinal scan confirmed. Location: SKIF Alpha. Sublevel 3. I stared at the screen, letting the data wash over me. I had checked in at 7:45 in the morning. I had not checked out until 8:30 at night, for 12 straight hours. I was locked in a subterranean vault, surrounded by armed guards and air-gapped servers. I opened a second tab and pulled up the fake gift deed from the court file Janice had shown me. I zoomed in on the notary seal. The location of the signing was listed as a law office in San Diego. San Diego was 200 miles south of the Vanguard office in Los Angeles. According to my parents' lie, I had somehow slipped out of a secure government facility, driven 200 miles through the worst traffic in America to sign a document giving away my home, and then driven 200 miles back to sneak into a biometric vault, all without triggering a single alarm or missing a minute of the simulation. It was physically, logically, and geographically impossible. But I was not done. I needed to bury them. I needed to make sure there was zero wiggle room for their lawyer to suggest I had used a body double or hacked the door logs. I navigated to the Fleet Management tab. On that day, my personal car had been in the shop, so I had checked out a company pool vehicle, a gray Ford Fusion. I found the reservation record. Vehicle ID, V429. Driver, Rita Weatherby. I clicked on the GPS history for that specific VIN number on that specific day. A map appeared on the screen, showing the vehicle's breadcrumb trail. The map was boring, beautifully, wonderfully boring. The car had entered the Vanguard underground parking structure at 7:30 in the morning. The GPS dot sat motionless in that concrete box for 13 hours. It did not move an inch. It did not go to San Diego. It did not go to a notary. It sat in stall B14 gathering dust while I fought off simulated Russian malware upstairs. "Got you," I whispered. I stood up and walked to the public printer station in the corner of the hallway. It was an ancient machine that required a credit card and cost 25 cents per page. But right now, I would have paid $1,000 for these sheets of paper. I printed the retinal scan logs. I printed the fleet GPS report. I printed a copy of the company policy regarding SCIF lockdown procedures, highlighting the section that mandated the surrender of all personal devices. as the printer whirred and wheezed, spitting out the warm pages that would save my life. My personal phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message notification lit up the screen. The name at the top was simply Father. I swiped it open. I saw you run into the courthouse. It is useless. Rita. The judgment is black and white. Do not embarrass the family any further. Just let it go and we can help you find a small apartment. I stared at the words. He was watching. He had likely followed me here, or perhaps he had parked down the block and watched me sprint from my car. The arrogance of the message was suffocating. He truly believed that a piece of paper with a stamp on it was more powerful than the truth. He thought he could bully me into submission with the same tactics he had used when I was 12. Don't embarrass the family. That was always the weapon of choice, the threat of public shame. He thought I would be too afraid of a scandal to fight back. He thought I would quietly pack my boxes and fade away to protect their reputation. He did not realize that I no longer cared about the family reputation. I cared about my house. I did not reply. I did not type out a furious response telling him to go to hell. I did not block the number. Instead, I took a screenshot. I captured the message, the time it was sent, and the sender's ID. This was not just a property dispute anymore. This text message proved malice. It proved they knew I was fighting back and were trying to intimidate me into dropping the case. It showed that this was not a business transaction. It was a targeted harassment campaign. I sent the screenshot to the printer. I gathered the stack of warm paper from the tray. I had the where, the when, and the why. I had the alibi that placed me in a bunker and the text message that placed them in the role of the aggressor. I collated the documents, my hands moving with steady precision. Exhibit A, retinal scans. Exhibit B, GPS data. Exhibit C, the intimidation text. I stapled the packet together. The sharp clack of the stapler felt like the cocking of a gun. The door to Department 4 opened. A bailiff stuck his head out, looking down the empty hallway until his eyes landed on me. "Weatherby," he called out, "Judge Holloway will see you in chambers now." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my trench coat. I picked up my file, which was now twice as thick as it had been 10 minutes ago. I walked toward the bailiff. I was walking into a room with a judge who was known for eating unprepared litigants for breakfast. But I wasn't unprepared. I was armed with the unassailable truth of the surveillance state. My parents wanted a drama. I was about to give them a documentary. Judge Holloway's chambers felt less like an office and more like a pressurized cabin. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves packed with leather-bound legal codes that smelled of dust and time. There were no windows to the outside world, only the artificial hum of the ventilation system and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was a space designed to strip away the theatrics of the courtroom and leave only the raw, ugly bones of the law. I sat in a stiff wooden chair, my hands folded in my lap, knuckles white. Across from me sat Judge Catherine Holloway. She was a woman who seemed carved out of granite, with steel gray hair pulled back into a severe bun and horn-rimmed glasses that magnified eyes which had seen every variety of human deceit. She did not look sympathetic. She looked impatient. The door opened, and a man breezed in, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and unearned confidence. This was Mr. Blackwood, my parents' attorney. He was a man in his 50s with a tan that looked artificial and a suit that cost more than my car. He glanced at me not with hostility, but with the dismissive annoyance one reserves for a stain on a silk tie. To him, I was not a victim. I was a bratty daughter dragging out the inevitable eviction process. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and practiced. He did not sit until the judge gestured for him to do so. "I must protest. However, my clients have a valid judgment. This emergency motion feels like a delay tactic." Judge Holloway ignored his opening gambit. She picked up my file, flipping it open with a sharp snap of her wrist. "Ms. Weatherby claims she was never served," Holloway said, looking over the rim of her glasses at Blackwood. "She claims the proof of service lists an address where she has not resided for 5 years. That is a serious allegation. Counselor, due process hinges on notice. Blackwood chuckled softly, a patronizing sound that made my skin crawl. He leaned forward, adopting a posture of reasonable compromise. Your Honor, this is a family dispute. Emotions are high. My clients, Garrick and Sylvia, are elderly. They believed in good faith that their daughter still frequented the Pine Street address. It was the family home for years. If there was an error in service, it was an honest mistake, not a calculated fraud. An honest mistake? I spoke up, my voice cutting through the oily atmosphere he was creating. They stood across the street this morning to watch the eviction. They know exactly where I live because they were staring at my front door. Blackwood turned to me, his smile tight and condescending. Ms. Weatherby, please, let us not waste the judge's time with paranoia. Judge Holloway held up a hand, silencing us both. She turned her gaze to me. Ms. Weatherby, let us assume for a moment that the service was flawed. That gets your foot back in the door. But it does not resolve the underlying issue. The eviction is based on title. Who owns the property? I do, I said firmly. I have the grant deed, the mortgage statements, and the tax records. And so do my clients, Blackwood interjected smoothly. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a document protected by a plastic sleeve. He slid it across the mahogany desk toward the judge. This is the original gift deed, executed on August 14th of last year. As you can see, Ms. Weatherby transferred the title to her parents voluntarily. The consideration was love and affection. It seems that affection has since soured, and she is now trying to renege on the gift. Judge Holloway picked up the document. She scrutinized it under the desk lamp. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. I watched her eyes scan the paper. I knew what she was seeing. The legal description of my home, the standard boilerplate language of transfer, and at the bottom, a signature that looked terrifyingly like my own. Beside it was the red stamp of a notary public. Holloway looked up, her expression unreadable. She turned the document so it faced me. Is this your signature, Ms. Weatherby? She asked. The question was a trap. If I said it looked like mine, I validated it. If I screamed it was a forgery without proof, I looked desperate. I looked at the ink. I looked at the date. August 14th. I deny that signature, I said, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. But more importantly, Your Honor, I deny the physics of that document. Holloway raised an eyebrow. Explain. That deed claims I signed it in the presence of a notary at 2:00 in the afternoon on August 14th, I said, locking eyes with the judge. I am not just saying I did not sign it. I am saying that at that specific hour, on that specific day, it was physically impossible for me to be in that room. I was not there. I was not even close to there. Blackwood let out a sigh of exaggerated exhaustion. Your Honor, this is classic seller's remorse. She signed it, and now she regrets it. The notary seal is presumptive evidence of validity. Unless she can prove she was on the moon, the deed stands. Judge Holloway looked from Blackwood to me, and then back to the document. She tapped her finger against the notary's stamp. She was weighing the sanctity of a notarized document against the absolute conviction in my voice. She was a creature of the law, and the law loved paper. But she was also a judge who knew that paper could lie. I am not going to evict a woman from her home based on a contested document without a proper hearing. Holloway ruled, closing the file. I am issuing a temporary stay of execution for 24 hours. Blackwood started to protest. Your Honor, your clients can wait one more day. Mr. Blackwood. Holloway snapped. Her eyes narrowed. I am setting an evidentiary hearing for tomorrow morning at 9:00. And Mr. Blackwood, I want the notary public here, in person. I want to hear from the man who claims he saw her sign this. She turned to me. And you, Ms. Weatherby, you say it was physically impossible? You better bring more than just your word. You bring me hard evidence. If you waste my time with a he said, she said argument, I will dissolve the stay and you will be out on the street by lunch. I will bring the evidence, I promised. Good, Holloway said. We are adjourned. We stood up. The air in the room felt slightly thinner, breathable again. I had bought time, 24 hours. It was not a victory, but it was a lifeline. As we walked out into the hallway, Blackwood paused to adjust his cufflinks. He looked at me with a smirk that suggested he knew something I did not. You are fighting a losing battle, Rita, he said, dropping the formalities now that the judge was out of earshot. We have a notarized deed. You think you can break a notary on the stand? Victor Crabtree is a professional. He keeps good records. You are just going to embarrass yourself. He believed it. He truly believed that the notary, this Victor Crabtree, was a solid wall that I would crash against. He assumed that whatever bribe my parents had paid Crabtree was enough to buy his silence and his composure. We will see, I said. Enjoy your last night in the house, Blackwood said, and turned on his heel, walking away with the confident stride of a man who had already spent his retainer fee. I watched him go. He was smiling. He thought the game was about interpretation and argument. He did not realize that I was not bringing an argument to court tomorrow. I was bringing a mathematical impossibility. I checked my watch. I had 19 hours to prepare for the kill. I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels striking the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown. The time for panic was over. The time for the hunt had begun. The drive back to Silver Lake felt less like a commute and more like a return to a crime scene that had not yet been taped off. When I turned onto my street, the morning gray had burned off into a bright, deceptive California afternoon sunshine. Deputy Miller and his patrol SUV were gone. The threat of immediate physical removal had vanished with him, dissolved by the paper shield I had constructed at the courthouse. But the siege was not over. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked across the street. The black sedan was still there. My parents had not moved. They were sitting inside the car with the windows rolled up, the engine idling. When I stepped out of my vehicle, I could feel their gaze physically, like a heat lamp on the back of my neck. I did not turn to look at them. I knew what I would see. The smug anticipation of the morning had curdled into a thick, venomous hatred. They knew I had bought 24 hours. They knew I was not currently on the street with my belongings in garbage bags. To narcissists, my survival was a personal insult. I walked to my front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and old books, the smell of the sanctuary I had fought so hard to build. I locked the door behind me and engaged the security chain. I was a prisoner in my own castle, but at least I held the keys. I went straight to my home office and woke up my computer. The screen blinked to life, and there it was in my inbox, the holy grail of my defense. The email was from the director of security at Vanguard Data Systems. The subject line was stark: verification of personnel location, Weatherby. Rita, I opened it. The body of the email was brief, professional, and devastating to my parents' case. It confirmed, under the penalty of perjury and backed by a digital signature that was mathematically impossible to forge, that employee Rita Weatherby was secured within the sensitive compartmented information facility from 0745 to 2030 hours on August 14th. It explicitly stated that no external communication devices were permitted or present. I printed 3 copies. The whir of the printer was the only sound in the house. With the alibi locked down, I turned my attention to the weapon they had used against me, the notary public. I typed the name Victor H. Crabtree into the search bar. I spent the next 4 hours dissecting the life of the man who had claimed to see me sign away my future. Victor was not a mastermind. He was a low-rent storefront notary operating out of a strip mall next to a dry cleaner in San Diego. I combed through public records and disciplinary boards. I found what I was looking for. He had never been disbarred or lost his commission, but he had dents in his armor. There were 2 prior complaints filed against him for clerical negligence regarding ID verification. Both had been dismissed with a warning. He was lazy, he was sloppy, and most importantly, he was likely broke. I found a lien against his personal property from 2 years ago. A man like that does not risk a felony for free. My parents had paid him. And a man who sells his seal for cash is a man who will crumble when he realizes the price of that cash is a prison sentence. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, the shadows in my living room grew long and sharp. I did not turn on the lights. I did not want to give them a silhouette to target. Around 9 o'clock, a car drove slowly past the house. It was not my parents' sedan. It was an older model coupe, dark blue or black, with a loud, rattling muffler. It slowed to a crawl right in front of my porch. Then, the high beams flicked on. 2 cones of blinding white light swept across my front windows, illuminating the living room like a stage set. I stood in the hallway, out of the line of sight, heart hammering. The car sat there for 30 seconds, the engine revving aggressively, before peeling away with a screech of tires. Psychological warfare. They were trying to rattle me. They wanted me sleepless, jumpy, and terrified before I walked into court. They wanted me to look crazy. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was steady. I was not afraid. I was angry, and anger is a much better fuel than fear. Then, my phone chimed, an email notification. I looked at the sender, Garrick Weatherby. I hesitated before opening it. The subject line was blank. I sat down at the kitchen island and tapped the screen. The text was a wall of words, a rambling, incoherent stream of consciousness that shifted wildly in tone. It started with venom, accusations that I was an ungrateful child, that I had abandoned them in their old age, but halfway through, the anger broke, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. We just need the house for a few months. Rita, my father wrote, it is the gambling debts. They are going to hurt us. We just need to leverage the equity to pay off the sharks. And then we will pay the mortgage back. We did not want to hurt you. We just need the money. Please drop the case. If you go to court tomorrow, you ruin us. I stared at the screen. The air in the kitchen seemed to freeze. There it was, the motive, the confession. They did not claim that I had gifted them the house anymore. They admitted it was a theft born of desperation. They admitted the gambling debts. They admitted the fraud was a means to an end. I did not reply. To reply would be to engage, and I was done engaging with them as a daughter. I forwarded the email to my cloud storage. Then I printed it. I highlighted the lines about the gambling debts and the admission that they did not want to hurt me, an implicit admission that they knew they were hurting me. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I had the how, the forgery. I had the when, the impossible timeline. And now, I had the why. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the colorful blouses and casual wear. I reached for the garment bag at the very back. I pulled out my suit. It was black, severe, and sharply tailored. I laid it out on the bed. Beside it, I placed a crisp white shirt, starched stiff. This was not clothing, it was armor. Tomorrow, I would not walk into that courtroom as Rita the daughter, or Rita the victim. I would walk in as Rita the executioner. I returned to my computer one last time. I initiated a full backup of my hard drive to a remote server. If they decided to escalate from intimidation to arson, if they decided to burn this house down rather than let me keep it, the evidence would survive in the digital ether. I uploaded the photos of the text messages, the PDF of the Vanguard logs, the scan of the fake deed, and the email confession. I finally lay down in bed around midnight. I kept my phone on the nightstand, recording audio, just in case they tried to break in. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Every creak of a floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of leaves outside sounded like a threat. Sleep came in shallow, fitful waves. I dreamed of drowning in paper, of ink filling my lungs like water. But every time I woke up, gasping, I remembered the file sitting on my desk. I remembered the timestamps. I remembered the digital signature. I was not drowning. I was building a dam, and tomorrow morning, I was going to open the floodgates and let the water wash them all away. The fear burned off. leaving behind a core of cold, hard steel. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise on Judgment Day. At 8:30 in the morning, Department 4 was a theater of war disguised as a sanctuary of justice. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, electric tension that vibrated against the wood-paneled walls. I sat alone at the defendant's table, my back straight, my hands resting on top of a pristine manila folder. I wore the black suit I had laid out the night before, and I felt less like a woman and more like a loaded weapon. To my right, at the plaintiff's table, sat the opposition. My parents, Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby, looked the picture of geriatric innocence. My mother was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a string of pearls, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. My father wore a tweed jacket that was slightly too large, giving him an air of frailty that I knew was entirely manufactured. Between them sat Mr. Blackwood, their attorney, who was arranging his papers with the confidant. Crisp movements of a man who believed the check had already cleared, but there was a fourth person in their party, seated slightly apart in the witness chair, looking as if he wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. Victor H. Crabtree, the notary public. He was a balding man in a cheap gray suit that was straining at the buttons. Despite the aggressive air conditioning of the courtroom, a sheen of sweat glistened on his upper lip. He kept shifting his weight, his eyes darting around the room, landing on everything except me. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Catherine Holloway swept into the room, her black robe billowing behind her. She took the bench, her face set in a mask of judicial indifference. She did not look at my parents' performance of frailty. She did not look at my solitude. She looked at the docket. "Case number CV 49201, she announced, her voice cutting through the silence. "Weatherby versus Weatherby. We are here on an evidentiary hearing regarding the defendant's motion to set aside judgment based on fraud. Counsel, state your appearances." "Robert Blackwood for the plaintiffs, Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby," Blackwood said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "We are ready to proceed, Your Honor." "Rita Weatherby," I said, standing up. My voice was steady. "Appearing pro se," Judge Holloway nodded. "Very well, Mr. Blackwood, the burden is on you to prove the validity of the title document. As the defendant has alleged forgery, you may make a brief opening statement." Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the gallery, as if playing to an audience that wasn't there. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with syrupy insincerity. "This is a tragedy of a family broken by greed. My clients are loving parents who have supported their daughter, Rita, for decades. 6 months ago, in a moment of gratitude and perhaps guilt for her past reliance on them, the defendant signed a gift deed transferring her property to her parents. It was a gesture of love, but now, cold feet have set in. Greed has returned, and to claw back this gift, she has resorted to scandalous accusations against her own flesh and blood. She calls them liars. She calls them forgers. It is the height of ingratitude." My mother let out a soft, audible sob. It was perfectly timed. I did not react. I did not roll my eyes. I sat like a stone statue. Blackwood was attacking my character because he knew the facts were weak. He was trying to make the judge feel, because he knew she could not think her way to a ruling in his favor. "We have the deed," Blackwood concluded, gesturing to the defense table. "We have the notary who witnessed the signature. The law is clear. A notarized document is presumed valid. Thank you." Judge Holloway turned to me. "Ms. Weatherby, do you wish to make a statement?" "I do, Your Honor," I said. I did not leave my table. I did not use flowery language. "Mr. Blackwood wants to talk about emotions. I want to talk about physics. I intend to prove that the document in question is a physical impossibility. I will not waste the court's time with stories. I will only present data." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Call your first witness, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood called Victor Crabtree. The notary stumbled slightly as he took the oath. He sat down, wiping his palms on his knees. Under Blackwood's gentle questioning, he recited his script. Yes, he was a licensed notary. Yes, he maintained a logbook. Yes, on August 14th of last year, a woman identifying herself as Rita Weatherby came to his office in San Diego. Yes, he checked her driver's license. Yes, she signed the deed in his presence. "And is that woman in this courtroom today?" Blackwood asked. Gesturing theatrically toward me, Crabtree looked at me then. For a brief second, our eyes locked. I saw the panic in his pupils. He did not recognize me because he had never seen me before. He was looking at a stranger he was about to frame for a felony. "Yes," Crabtree mumbled, looking away quickly. "That is her. Nothing further?" Blackwood said, sitting down with a smirk. "Ms. Weatherby," Judge Holloway said. "Your witness." I stood up. I picked up the single sheet of paper I had prepared. My cross-examination outline. I walked toward the witness stand. I stopped 5 feet away from Victor Crabtree. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, then 10. The sound of his heavy breathing became audible. "Mr. Crabtree," I began, my voice low and pleasant. "You testified that you keep a detailed journal of all notarial acts, as required by law. Is that correct?" "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. "And you are certain, 100% certain, that the signing took place on August 14th? "It is in my book," he said defensively. "August 14th. And the time?" I pressed. "What time was it?" He glanced at Blackwood. But Blackwood could not help him now. "Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 2:15. 2 o'clock in the afternoon," I repeated, making sure the court reporter took down every syllable. "In San Diego." "Yes," Crabtree said. I turned to look at Mr. Blackwood. "And counsel for the plaintiff stands by this timeline? You are asserting to this court that I was physically present in San Diego at 1400 hours on August 14th? Blackwood stood up, looking annoyed. "Objection. Asked and answered. The witness has stated the time. The document is dated. Why is the defendant badgering the witness about the calendar? I am locking in the timeline." "Your Honor," I said to the judge, "it is crucial." "Overruled," Holloway said. "The timeline is established. August 14th, 2 o'clock, San Diego. Move on. Ms. Weatherby." I turned back to Crabtree. I took a step closer. The air between us felt charged. "Mr. Crabtree, look at my face," I commanded. He hesitated, then lifted his eyes. "Do you really remember me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "Do you remember my voice? Do you remember shaking my hand? Or do you only remember the envelope of cash my father handed you to stamp a document that was already signed?" "Objection!" Blackwood shouted, leaping to his feet. "Argumentative, badgering the witness. There is no evidence of bribery." "Sustained," Holloway said. But her eyes did not leave Victor Crabtree's face. She saw the way he flinched. She saw the way his Adam's apple bobbed. The question had been struck from the record, but it had not been struck from her mind. "I will withdraw the question," I said calmly. "I have no further questions for this witness at this time, but I reserve the right to recall him after I present my defense." "Step down," Holloway ordered. Crabtree practically ran back to his seat. "Ms. Weatherby," the judge said, "call your witness." "I call myself," I said, "and I wish to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A." "Nah." I walked back to my table and picked up the thick packet of documents with the red confidentiality stamp of the Department of Defense contractor on the cover. I handed the original to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. I handed a copy to a confused-looking Mr. Blackwood. "Your Honor," I said, standing in the center of the well, "the document you are holding is a certified, digitally signed security log from Vanguard Data Systems. It is a classified facility." Judge Holloway put on her reading glasses. She opened the packet. "Mr. Crabtree just testified under oath that I was in his office in San Diego at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on August 14th, I said. my voice rising, filling the room with the force of absolute truth. But that is impossible, because on August 14th, from 7:45 in the morning until 8:30 at night, I was locked inside a subterranean server room in Los Angeles, participating in a government cybersecurity simulation. I pointed to the document in the judge's hand. Exhibit A contains my retinal scan entry and exit logs. I continued. It establishes that at the exact moment Mr. Crabtree claims I was signing a deed 200 miles away, I was actually 3 stories underground, behind a biometric airlock, with no phone, no internet, and surrounded by 20 witnesses with top-secret security clearances. The room went dead silent. Judge Holloway looked at the paper. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at the location. Then, she slowly lifted her head and looked at Victor Crabtree. The color drained from Mr. Blackwood's face. He looked down at the copy in his hands, realizing he had just let his clients march him into a massacre. I also submit Exhibit B, I said, relentless. The GPS tracking logs of the company vehicle I was assigned that day, which shows the car never left the parking garage in Los Angeles. I looked at my parents. My mother had stopped crying. My father's mouth was slightly open. They were staring at the documents as if they were seeing a ghost. They had forgotten. They had forgotten where I worked. They had been so focused on the lie that they forgot I lived in a world of hard data. The math does not work, Your Honor, I said, turning back to the bench. I cannot be in 2 places at once. One of these records is a lie, and I think we both know the Department of Defense keeps better time than a notary who takes cash on the side. The document landed on the judge's bench with a heavy, authoritative slap. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a certified extract from a Department of Defense contractor, stamped with security clearance markers that made the mundane civil court filings look like grocery lists. What you are looking at, Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, is the access log for a sensitive compartmented information facility. It is a government secure zone. I walked closer to the bench, sensing the shift in the room's gravity. The air felt thinner, sharper. On August 14th, at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the moment Mr. Crabtree claims he was watching me sign a deed in his San Diego office, I was physically located 10 meters underground in a reinforced concrete bunker in Los Angeles. I was 3 hours away by car. I had no cell phone signal. I had no internet access. And I certainly did not have the ability to teleport to a strip mall 200 miles south. Judge Holloway did not look up immediately. She was tracing the lines on the spreadsheet with her finger. She compared the timestamp on the retinal scan log, 1400 hours, with the timestamp on the notary journal copy that Blackwood had foolishly entered into evidence earlier. The silence that stretched out was agonizing for them, but for me, it was a symphony. It was the sound of a lie dying in real time. Holloway slowly lifted her head. She took off her reading glasses and set them down on the heavy oak desk. Her expression had changed. The annoyance she had shown earlier regarding a family squabble was gone. In its place was the cold, terrifying fury of a judge who realizes her court is being used as a weapon for fraud. She turned her chair slightly to face the witness stand. She did not raise her voice, which made her words infinitely more dangerous. "Mr. Crabtree," she said. The notary jumped in his seat, as if he had been tasered. He was dabbing his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief, but the sweat was winning. "Mr. Crabtree," Holloway repeated, her eyes boring into him. "I want you to look at this document. It places the defendant inside a high-security facility at the exact moment you swore under oath she was in your office." Crabtree opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. "Now," the judge continued, leaning forward, "before you say another word, I want to remind you that perjury is a felony. I am about to refer this entire file to the district attorney's office, so I am going to give you one chance, one single, fleeting chance, to amend your testimony before you leave this courtroom in handcuffs." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Victor Crabtree looked at Mr. Blackwood, but the lawyer was staring at his shoes, suddenly finding the pattern of the floor tiles fascinating. Then, slowly, desperately, Crabtree turned to look at my parents. He looked at Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby with pleading eyes, begging them to save him, begging them to offer up some excuse or explanation. But my parents did not look at him. They were staring straight ahead, their jaws set, their faces masks of stony denial. They had used him, and now that he was burning, they were refusing to even smell the smoke. The betrayal broke him. "They brought it to me," Crabtree whispered. "Speak up," Holloway commanded. "They brought it to me," Crabtree blurted out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He pointed a shaking finger at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Weatherby, they came to my office that afternoon. They had the deed already signed. They told me Rita was outside in the car." A gasp rippled through the gallery. I did not gasp. I just watched. "They said she was sick," Crabtree continued, the words tumbling out of him in a rush of panic. "They said she had the flu and was highly contagious and could not come in. They said it was urgent. They said it was a family gift. I just wanted to help. They offered me an extra $200 for the travel fee, even though I did not travel. I never saw her. I never saw Rita Weatherby. I just stamped it because they seemed like nice old people." Judge Holloway slammed her gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. "You notarized a signature you did not witness?" she barked. "That is not helping. Mr. Crabtree, that is fraud. That is a crime. It is a lie." The scream came from the plaintiff's table. My father, Garrick Weatherby, shot up from his chair. His face was a deep, violent shade of red. The mask of the frail old man had completely disintegrated, revealing the rage that I had known my entire life. "He is lying," my father shouted, pointing at me, then at the judge. "That man is a liar, and that document is fake. The machine is wrong. How can you trust a computer over a father's word? She was there. She is ungrateful trash who is trying to trick you." "Sit down, sir," the bailiff shouted, stepping forward, his hand resting on his belt. "I will not sit down," my father roared. "This is my house. I paid for her to be born. I own her." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. My mother grabbed his arm, trying to pull him down, hissing at him to shut up. But the damage was done. The facade of the loving parents had shattered. Everyone in the room, the clerk, the bailiff, the judge, and even their own lawyer, could now see the toxic, controlling monster that lived beneath the tweed jacket. "Bailiff," Judge Holloway said, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor blade. "If Mr. Weatherby says one more word, you will place him in a holding cell for contempt of court. Do I make myself clear?" My father looked at the bailiff, who was now standing 2 feet away from him, chest out, ready to engage. The reality of the situation finally pierced through his narcissism. He was not in control here. He sank back into his chair, breathing heavily, his eyes fixed on me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I met his gaze. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I turned my attention to Mr. Blackwood. The high-priced attorney looked like he had just swallowed a shard of glass. He was physically moving his chair inches away from my parents, creating a visible gap between himself and his clients. He began shoving papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. He knew exactly what had just happened. He had suborned perjury. He had presented a forged document to the court. His license to practice law was currently dangling by a very thin thread, and he was ready to cut my parents loose to save it. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Holloway said, her voice dangerously calm, "I assume you were unaware that your witness was going to admit to a felony on the stand?" "Completely unaware, Your Honor," Blackwood stammered, his voice rising an octave. "I am shocked. I had no idea. If I had known, I never would have filed the complaint." "I am sure," Holloway said dryly. She turned back to me. "Ms. Weatherby, you may step down. I have heard enough." I walked back to my table. The sound of my heels on the floor was the only sound in the room. I sat down and folded my hands over the Vanguard file. The trap had not just sprung, it had snapped their spines. I looked at the judge, waiting for the final blow. Judge Holloway did not need to deliberate. She did not need to retreat to her chambers to consult case law or weigh the credibility of the witnesses. The truth was not just evident, it was blinding. It sat in the center of the courtroom, radioactive and undeniable, radiating from the sobbing notary and the terrified silence of my parents. She picked up her pen. The scratching sound it made against the paper was the only noise in the room. It sounded like a sword being sharpened. The court finds that the instrument purported to be a gift deed, dated August 14th, is a forgery. Judge Holloway declared. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute, crushing weight of finality. It is void ab initio. It is invalid. It is a nullity. She signed the order with a sharp, aggressive stroke. The writ of possession issued against the defendant, Rita Weatherby, is hereby quashed permanently, she continued, looking down at the clerk to ensure the record was perfect. The default judgment is vacated with prejudice. Ms. Weatherby is recognized as the sole and lawful owner of the property. Her title is restored, effective immediately. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 24 hours. My shoulders dropped an inch. The house was safe. The lock on my front door would remain mine, but Judge Holloway was not finished. This was a civil courtroom, but what had transpired here was not civil. She turned her gaze toward the plaintiff's table. She looked at Garrick and Sylvia Weatherby. For the first time, she did not look at them as elderly litigants. She looked at them as criminals. Mr. and Mrs. Weatherby, she said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You came into my courtroom, you swore an oath to tell the truth, and then you presented a fabricated document to this court in an attempt to weaponize the justice system against your own daughter. You tried to use the power of the state to commit theft. My father opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another lie or another justification about gambling debts, but the look in the judge's eyes stopped him dead. That is not just a strategic error, Holloway said, her voice turning to ice. That is an insult to this bench. It is an insult to the law, and it is a felony. She turned to the bailiff. I am ordering the transcript of these proceedings, along with all exhibits, to be immediately forwarded to the office of the district attorney and the county sheriff. She ruled. I am referring this matter for criminal prosecution regarding charges of forgery, filing false instruments, and conspiracy to commit grand theft. My mother gasped. A wet choking sound. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his tweed jacket. They had come here expecting a quick payday. They were leaving as targets of a criminal investigation. Furthermore, Judge Holloway said, shifting her eyes to the witness stand where Victor Crabtree was still trembling. Mr. Crabtree, you admitted under oath to notarizing a signature you did not witness. That is perjury. That is falsifying a public record. She nodded to the bailiff standing by the door. Remand the witness into custody immediately. The bailiff moved with practiced speed. He unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound of the cuffs locking around Victor Crabtree's wrists echoed off the high ceiling. It was a brutal, mechanical sound. Victor began to weep openly, begging, babbling about his license, about his family. But the bailiff ignored him, hauling him up by the arm to drag him toward the holding cell door. My parents watched this happen. They watched the man they had hired, the man they had bribed, being shackled and led away like a common criminal. The color drained from their faces entirely. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. In its place was sheer, unadulterated terror. They realized, finally, that money and parental guilt trips could not stop handcuffs. Mr. Blackwood, their attorney, was already packing his briefcase. He did not look at them. He was fleeing the sinking ship before the mast snapped. Court is adjourned, Judge Holloway said. She stood up, gathered her robe, and vanished into her chambers without a backward glance. The gavel banged one last time. I stood up. I felt light, as if gravity had released its hold on me. I picked up my Vanguard file. I picked up the original deed. I placed them neatly into my bag. I turned to leave. "Rita!" The scream came from the other side of the rail. It was my mother. She had thrown herself against the wooden divider that separated the well of the court from the gallery. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and panic. "Rita, wait!" she shrieked, reaching out a hand as if she could physically grab me from across the room. "You have to tell her. You have to go back in there and tell the judge it was a misunderstanding. They are going to put us in jail. Rita, we are your parents." I stopped. I turned slowly to face them. My father was standing behind her, looking old and broken, his hands shaking. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and expectation. He was waiting for me to fix it. He was waiting for the dutiful daughter to step in and clean up the mess. Just as I had done 1,000 times before, he expected me to soften. He expected me to care. "You cannot do this to us," my mother wailed, her voice echoing in the emptying room. "We gave you life. You owe us. How can you be so cold? How can you send your own mother and father to prison?" I looked at them. I really looked at them. I saw the woman who had signed a fake name to steal my home. I saw the man who had texted me to give up so he could pay his bookie. I saw two people who would have happily watched me sleep on the street tonight if their plan had worked. I felt nothing. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel triumph. I felt the profound, peaceful silence of a bridge that had burned all the way down to the water. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I looked my mother directly in the eyes. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a blank canvas where they could no longer paint their guilt. I did not say a word. I turned my back on them. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor. Click, click, click. "Rita!" my mother screamed again, her voice cracking, desperate, hysterical. "Rita, come back here. Do not walk away from me. Rita!" I kept walking. I reached the heavy double doors at the back of the room. I pushed the right door open. The light from the hallway spilled in, bright and clean. I stepped through. I let the heavy wood door swing shut behind me. The muffled sound of my mother screaming my name was cut off instantly as the latch clicked into place. Silence. The hallway was empty. It was just me and the quiet hum of the building. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that tasted like freedom. I walked toward the exit, toward the sunshine, toward my house. It was over. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts. So please comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served, please make sure to subscribe to BitterSweet Drama Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need a little satisfaction in their day.